Un orden, Elizabeth. La doctora Elizabeth Taylor nos está acompañando también, que es presidenta del Washington Accord, y va a tener su primera presentación en unos minutos.
Buenos días con todos.
Muy buenos días a todos los presentes en la sala. ¿Qué tal, Enrique? Qué gusto saludarte.
Para hoy día, comerme pues un chupe de camarones contigo. Carajo, qué pena que no estamos allá.
Sí.
Bueno, ya puedes programar tu visita.
Al pie del
mi amigo.
Claro. Pero lo
Perfecto,
importante
entonces,
es que te veo que estás muy bien de salud. Eso es lo más valioso.
Así es, eso es lo que vale.
Entonces, muy buenos días con todos. Vamos a dar inicio a esta sesión de inauguración del sexto Simposio Internacional de Acreditación ICACIT. Bueno, muy buenos días con todos y todas. Mi nombre es Jimmy Tuyume Salazar, gerente general de ICACIT. En nombre de ICACIT, Agencia Acreditadora Internacional, especializada en programas STEM y arquitectura de pre y posgrado, les doy la más cordial bienvenida a nuestros invitados nacionales e internacionales de toda Latinoamérica, que nos acompañan el día de hoy por la plataforma Zoom y aquellos que nos están siguiendo vía nuestro canal de YouTube. El día de hoy nos tomamos una pausa en nuestras recargadas agendas para participar en el sexto simposio ICACIT 2020, el evento más importante de acreditación y educación en ingeniería y computación de Latinoamérica. En esta edición tenemos como objetivo que el evento se convierta en un espacio para compartir conocimientos y experiencias en la mejora continua de la calidad educativa, acreditación y formación de profesionales de las áreas de computación, ingeniería y tecnología e ingeniería. En esta sexta edición se desarrollará en modalidad virtual debido a la coyuntura actual en la cual vivimos a causa de la COVID-19. En mi rol de presidente del comité organizador de ICACIT, del Simposio ICACIT 2020, me encuentro muy feliz de poder dar inicio a esta nueva edición de nuestro magno evento, que frente a la pandemia y diversas restricciones que se han presentado, nos generó que canceláramos la oportunidad de estar en estos momentos en la blanca ciudad de Arequipa, exactamente en las instalaciones del Paraninfo de la Universidad Nacional San Agustín, institución que gustosamente había ofrecido sus instalaciones, convirtiéndose de esta forma en nuestro principal sponsor y colaborador. Sin embargo, esta situación solo generó que el equipo ICACIT despliegue diversas acciones, esfuerzos y trabajo por realizar y generar la continuidad de nuestro magno evento que viene realizándose desde hace más de 6 años. En esta sexta edición de Congreso tendremos la segunda edición del Call for Paper, que luego de haber pasado por nuestro comité revisor, conformado por más de 80 destacados profesionales con grados de doctor y maestría en más de 20 países del mundo, solamente fueron aceptados el 22% de paper, artículos que serán presentados en estos 2 días. Y posteriormente sus autores podrán compartir sus investigaciones, que sus papers serán indexados en IEEE Explore. También tendremos el desarrollo de 4 talleres especializados y conferencias magistrales, todas estas actividades desarrolladas por destacados expertos nacionales de las principales instituciones educativas y de nivel internacional, provenientes de los países de Australia, Irlanda, Canadá, Hong Kong, China, Colombia, México, Japón y Turquía, que gustosos compartirán sus experiencias e investigaciones. Para dar inicio a este simposio ICACIT 2020, voy a dar el pase al ingeniero José Durán Talledo para su moderación de esta primera parte y continúen con nuestro programa. Muchas gracias y adelante, José.
Muchas gracias, Jimmy. Buenos días a todos los participantes y a los panelistas, distinguidos invitados en el sexto simposio de ICACIT. En esta oportunidad, para continuar con la sesión inaugural, tengo el privilegio de invitar al presidente del Consejo Directivo de ICACIT, Enrique Álvarez Rodríguez. Enrique, adelante, por favor.
Sí. Muy buenos días con todos. Quiero darles la bienvenida a este evento que se repite desde hace 6 años, este simposio ICACIT que viene reuniendo a los actores más importantes de las entidades educativas en las áreas que mencionó Jimmy, de la computación, la tecnología, la ingeniería, la ciencia y también de la arquitectura. Quiero agradecerles por su participación, porque a pesar de la coyuntura en la que estamos viviendo, no hemos detenido nuestras actividades y hemos, como buenos profesionales en estas áreas, hemos sabido dar solución a los problemas y llevarlos a cabo. Quiero hacer un agradecimiento muy especial a nuestros participantes extranjeros, a Elizabeth Taylor, que es la presidenta del Washington Accord, que le daba un realce a nuestro evento para la inauguración. Tenemos también al doctor Anastasis Kosanitis de Canadá, al profesor Buren Özguler de Turquía, ¿no? Y a todos nuestros expositores de los talleres que nos acompañan desde hace varios años en nuestras actividades. Un particular agradecimiento a nuestro anfitrión, aunque sea virtual, a Roel Sánchez, rector de la Universidad San Agustín de Arequipa, que, como le comentaba antes, qué pena que no esté en Arequipa para comerme unos camarones, un cortejito y tantas cosas ricas, un rocoto relleno, pero ya habrá oportunidad pues de visitarlos y estar allá, sobre todo con esa uva negra criolla que es tan buena para el pisco, del cual espero llevar otra botella adicionalmente. No quiero demorar más en la inauguración, agradecerles por su participación y doy pase a las siguientes presentadores.
Muchas gracias, Enrique, por tu intervención. A continuación, quiero darle pase y la bienvenida al doctor Alberto Sánchez de Ecuador. El doctor Sánchez es director de la región 9 del IEEE, la región IEEE Latinoamérica y el Caribe, y esta región 9 del IEEE participa en el presente año como sponsor técnico de nuestro simposio. Por lo tanto, le damos la bienvenida y lo invitamos a dar sus palabras.
Buenos días con todos. ¿Se me escucha? ¿Sí? Buenos días, Enrique, José, Jimmy. Muchas gracias por tan gentil invitación a participar en ICACIT 2020. Creo que ahora más que nunca ICACIT tiene una importancia fundamental en donde los sistemas de educación han tenido que modificarse de forma instantánea prácticamente de un día para el otro, pasar de una modalidad presencial a una modalidad virtual en la mayoría del mundo. Creo que eventos como ICACIT, más allá de la forma en la que se esté llevando, el contenido de ICACIT es muy importante para las actuales circunstancias que estamos atravesando, y su importancia y su relevancia es aún más importante, es aún más trascendental. Quiero agradecerles mucho por el esfuerzo que han venido realizando a través de ICACIT en Perú y yo creo que en Latinoamérica, al ser una de las primeras, si no es la primera, no estoy muy seguro del historial, de estar la primera agencia acreditadora latinoamericana de estar aprobada por el Washington Accord, lo cual le da una trascendencia muy importante, y este evento en particular pues es fundamental. Muchas gracias, y pues espero que todos los invitados especiales que van a asistir el día de hoy en sus presentaciones, en sus contribuciones a este evento, pues se lleven de la mejor manera, y un fuerte abrazo a todos. No les quito más de tiempo y le dejo al siguiente participante. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Alberto, por su intervención en nombre de ICACIT. Le enviamos un fuerte abrazo hasta Ecuador. A continuación, tengo el privilegio de invitar al doctor Roel Sánchez Sánchez, quien es rector de la Universidad Nacional de San Agustín de Arequipa, y esta vez nos acompaña en calidad de representante de sponsor local del Simposio ICACIT 2020. Bienvenido, doctor Roel, adelante.
Muchas gracias, José. Saludar a todos los presentes en esta sala y los seguidores por los diferentes medios, en especial en la persona del señor presidente del Consejo Directivo de ICACIT, Enrique Álvarez Rodríguez, al señor gerente general de ICACIT, Jimmy Tulume Salazar, y en forma especial también al señor Alberto Sánchez. Para nosotros, como Universidad Nacional de San Agustín, es muy loable que ICACIT, como agencia acreditadora, no solo con presencia latinoamericana, sino ya con reconocimientos en diferentes latitudes del mundo, como Europa, Norteamérica, pues esté llevando a cabo este 6º Simposio Internacional de Acreditación en Ingeniería y Computación, hoy más que nunca, cuando la educación universitaria tiene que virar en cuanto a sus propios esquemas, sus propias estructuras organizacionales y sobre todo en lo que significa a esa oferta educativa de excelencia que deben tener toda institución y por lo tanto, en esa perspectiva, los programas profesionales deben reunir ciertas condiciones básicas de calidad, pero lo más importante, deben cumplir también aquellos requisitos que estén implícitos en lo que significa esta filosofía de la mejora continua y qué mejor a partir de lo que es la acreditación. Y ahí está el rol importante de ICACIT en su labor que viene desarrollando en todos los programas que ha evaluado en Perú y por lo tanto eso permite pues darle una mirada diferente a la oferta educativa. Y hoy más que nunca, cuando nosotros nos encontramos con la presencia y el avance de las propias tecnologías vinculadas, por ejemplo, a temas relacionados de la presencia de inteligencia artificial, Big Data, todo el tema de la digitalización de los procesos, Industria 4.0, y por otro lado con escenarios post-pandemia, como la recesión económica que nos va a encontrar, el tema vinculado a la reestructuración también de lo que significa la previsión en cuanto a la oferta laboral. Entonces hay situaciones que hoy más que nunca la institución universitaria debe demandar a la acreditación de sus programas profesionales. Y ahí está el rol importante que viene sosteniendo ICACIT. Y en esa perspectiva de lo que significa, por supuesto, ese rol, definitivamente hay un compromiso también, no solamente con la acreditación de los programas, sino que ICACIT, el hecho de acreditar un programa profesional, está dando fe pública de que ese programa no solo tiene el perfil profesional en el marco de lo que significa la malla curricular, el plan de estudios, el desarrollo y la presencia de las competencias que se exigen en cada uno de los criterios de evaluación, sino que también ICACIT a partir de ello da fe pública de que ese profesional está listo para insertarse a la sociedad como agente de cambio económico, social, cultural y que contribuya al desarrollo. Y hoy más que nunca, en un escenario post-COVID-19, exige la sociedad de esos profesionales para que desde la universidad contribuyamos nosotros también a humanizar la sociedad. Por lo tanto, lo vemos de vital importancia este encuentro a través del Simposio Internacional de Acreditación en Ingeniería y Computación, Simposio ICACIT 2020, donde los panelistas, donde los invitados especiales presentarán sus conocimientos, sus experiencias y lo más importante, y esperamos ahí que ICACIT pues difunda estas conclusiones y podamos entonces acceder a ellas y podamos también incorporar en la dinámica del quehacer universitario. La universidad está muy comprometida con esa oferta educativa de excelencia, con el cumplimiento de esa gestión de la calidad a partir de lo que significa la acreditación, pero también la universidad está muy comprometida en incorporar todas aquellas otras funciones relacionadas a la dinámica propia de la universidad, entre ellos, sin descuidar el tema, como lo plantea el criterio número 3, el tema vinculado a la investigación. La universidad tiene que generar investigación, innovación, desarrollo tecnológico y transferencia tecnológica. Ahí está diríamos, la riqueza más importante de estos estándares también que nos pueden llevar a nosotros a generar un ecosistema de investigación, de innovación y desarrollo tecnológico, pero cómo a partir de ello nosotros hacemos transferencia tecnológica. Por lo tanto, una vez más, a nombre de la Universidad Nacional de San Agustín de Arequipa, nuestra felicitación a ICACIT y augurándoles éxitos en este 6º Simposio Internacional de Acreditación en Ingeniería y Computación. Gracias por invitarnos a estar presentes en esta sesión inaugural.
Muchas gracias al doctor Sánchez, rector de la Universidad Nacional de San Agustín de Arequipa, quien gentilmente nos acompaña en esta sesión inaugural del Simposio 2020 de ICACIT y representa al sponsor local de nuestro simposio. Vamos a continuar entonces con nuestro programa. Permítanme un momento, por favor, para cambiar la presentación. Les agradecemos a nuestros distinguidos panelistas que nos acompañen en las siguientes sesiones. Bienvenidos a todos nuevamente. Un momento. Bien, esta parte del programa será conducida en inglés. On behalf of ICACIT, I would like to welcome Professor Elizabeth Taylor, Chair of the Washington Accord. Professor Elizabeth, could you please turn on your camera? Professor Taylor, good morning from Peru.
Good morning, and thank you for moving to English. I do appreciate your sensitivity to my language limitations, and I'm delighted to be here. I would like to share my screen so I can...
Yes, please let me introduce you to the attendees. Let me tell the attendees a little about Professor Taylor's background. Her more than 40-year engineering career includes a background in civil engineering and 10 years in design and construction management. Currently, she consults with various organizations on education and asset management. Her volunteer contribution within Engineers Australia includes roles like as Accreditation Board Chair, Sydney Division President, Chair of the National Women in Engineering Committee, and of Engineers Media and membership of two Code of Ethics reviews. Professor Taylor is currently the chair of the Washington Accord, one of the accords included in the International Engineering Alliance. We very welcome Professor Taylor, Emeritus Professor Taylor, to the ICACIT Symposium. Please let me share your presentation. Just a moment. Could you please tell me if you can see your presentation?
I can, but not on Zoom.
Oh, let me check.
I could see it on my desktop. So can I share my screen?
Now, is it okay?
José, en Nitro puedes presionar F1, 12 y se ve la pantalla completa.
Bien. Dame un segundo.
Oh, was that it there?
Yes, please. One moment. Nitro. Well, this is another program. Please, just a minute.
Jimmy, o pon tú la presentación y ella te va diciendo cuándo la vas pasando.
Jimmy, aquí la opción era.
En la parte inferior dice pantalla completa. F12.
Listo. Okay, we're ready. Sorry for the minutes. Please, Professor Taylor, you can start your presentation.
Thank you. Will somebody have to move the slides, or do I do that?
I will assist you, Professor Taylor.
Thank you very much for your invitation to join you today. It is my honor to participate in this symposium, and I look forward to hearing of the outcomes after the many excellent presentations that I have seen that will be shared among all of the many peers who are working in this area over the next couple of days. The title of my presentation today is Quality Assurance in Engineering Education. And if you move to the next slide, I would like to start with just looking at the educational model that we do use within the Washington Accord, because that is of particular relevance to everybody who will be participating in the work that we are doing in that accreditation forum, and then looking at how we view the drivers behind accreditation and what that might mean in terms of how we structure the way in which we undertake the accreditation process. I'll then move to a small or hopefully very short background on the International Engineering Alliance Accords, just to give you an idea of who we are and how we operate. And then again, the process of mutual recognition and accreditation that underpins those accords. The next part of my presentation will just look at the challenges of our times. We are very much in a seismic shift, I'd say, in the way in which we will need to view the future. And that is probably encapsulated best with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and also the disruption that we have been living through over the past year in COVID-19. And finally, I'll just share a few of the best practices in the way in which we are trying to manage those challenges for our times. Next slide. So for the particular way in which all of the members of the Washington Accord operate, the decision has been made to particularly focus on outcomes-based education. And you will note that I have decided to use the Wikipedia definition, because once you start getting into all of our academic statements about what that means, it does become very complex very quickly, because academic research in this area is pulling out all the nuances and the differences in the way in which we might approach education. But at the very top level, and to give just a framework for how we do look at educational models that we use as the basis for our engineering programs within the membership of the Washington Accord, it is about outcomes-based education. So rather than the focus being on inputs, rather than the focus being on mandating exactly what should happen in each classroom or in each lecture, there is a process of ensuring that we look at the outcomes and then design the curriculum to ensure that we can guarantee, to the extent possible within life, that the student process or the student education process will mean that we can be assured that the students, when they graduate, will have reached the standards that we have set for that education process. So in that sense, it is a very open educational process, because the faculty, or the academics as we call them in Australia, are then the people who have a very strong role in determining the style of teaching and the assessment processes that will assist an understanding or give the validity, the verification process, to assure that the student learning is reaching the standard specified. It then becomes that being what we would call in Australia the sage on the stage idea of the person that stands there and transmits knowledge can adapt itself to a number of ways in which those academics will engage with the learning of the students as instructor, as trainer, facilitator, mentor, all of that based on the outcomes that are being targeted. This is something that I have been working on since the 1990s. When I was an academic myself, I've been through this process. And at that stage, I did spend about 10 to 15 years designing curriculum based on outcomes-based education. So that was part of the background that led me then into working through into being a Dean of Engineering and bringing in outcomes-based education into a faculty. And then the next part of the process was then moving to chairing the accreditation board in Australia. So my background is one in which I have seen the process from all perspectives of the people that are involved in ensuring quality assurance in engineering education, from the academic in the room to the accreditation process, to now the Washington Accord at the international level. Next slide. So the drivers underpinning accreditation are then very much, and particularly in the outcomes-based education scenario, trying to balance quality assurance and risk management within that framework, because the quality assurance enables the organisation to achieve its purpose, as we all know, and then the risk management evaluates the effect of uncertainty on the likely attainment of those objectives. And I've particularly pulled those two drivers out as part of the requirements to think through as underpinning accreditation, because there are a number of aspects of education that we need to be constantly working through as the context in which that education is happening changes, as more technologies come into the way that we do business, our different cultural expectations or our relationships with communities will all impact on the way that we need or we are required or expect to design our education to meet the needs of our specific context. Next slide, thank you. So part of this is that outcomes-based education does allow for that innovation and change, because it does minimise the degree of prescription on how a specified program outcomes are to be attained. I became very conscious of this when I was a dean, because the portfolio of my faculty embraced a number of professions, including nursing, psychology, and engineering. And I was struck by the fact that the way accreditation was undertaken for nursing was very inputs-based. It was very much about, I had to make sure that within the laboratories or the setups that were done for the students to understand, say, what it was like to be in a hospital, that the accreditation group who would come round would actually look to see that we had the right number of towels next to each bed that the students would be working on as part of their laboratory work. Whereas in engineering, we were focused far more on looking at what outcomes would be required of the process of having the students in the laboratories. So I became at that point very conscious of the differences between how accreditation is set up or can be set up between different professions. And I must admit that at times it really did, I did wonder what the value of knowing how many towels there were next to a bed in a laboratory was actually going to achieve in terms of supporting student learning. So it becomes a question then of thinking about where is it important to understand the input that is required in a curriculum, and where is that input tied to what outcome is being addressed. I certainly am not somebody who would say, so therefore the design of the curriculum can be totally open-ended. It has to be extremely disciplined in that scenario as well. And the accreditation to ensure that quality assurance also needs to be very disciplined. But it does have the advantage of allowing genuine innovation to emerge from the discussions that academics and students and industry, for example, can have about how curriculum can change significantly to meet challenges as they arise. So that refers back to my last slide of saying it does then require accreditation and the people involved in accreditation to be constantly thinking through what does risk assessment mean in that situation. So having no exams, for example, which some people might say, what is the risk associated with that practice? And how does the curriculum design mitigate, for example, risks associated with, say, only doing group work? How can an individual's learning be measured in those scenarios? So that goes back to then that whole conscious effort that needs to constantly be being undertaken as the curriculum design is developed and various pedagogies and methodologies are used within that curriculum, and they need constantly to be assessed against the risk and the advantages that those practices might achieve in terms of student learning. And in that scenario, then, the accreditation policies and procedures need to look at that risk management approach that it might take to facilitate the innovation, but not at the risk of denying the quality of the education that is going to be part of the process or part of the outcome for the student and for the community. Which is summed up in my last point there, that the effective risk management is an essential part of ensuring innovation and change management within curriculum and within then the accreditation process. Next slide. So the way that we conceptualised this in the Accreditation Board in Engineers Australia was to very much look at the fact that pedagogy is the function that transforms the students to graduates. And within that, that has the student coming through that pedagogical process to graduation. The academic quality system, the academic operational environment, and the academic program are all inputs into ensure that that process does actually occur in an effective way. So we move then to the next slide, which then talks or demonstrates how accreditation is one of those control mechanisms on that pedagogy to ensure its quality assurance. And that also links accreditation into professional practice, because it is important that the voice of industry, the voice of the community, is part of how those control mechanisms into the pedagogy will ensure that the outcome, the educational outcome, is fit for purpose for the professional life that that student will have upon graduation. So in the red there, it's that accreditation seeks to verify that the pedagogy function does provide the graduates with the initial competencies suitable for entry to professional practice. And I do notice that there are a number of presentations moving forward on how those competencies are set and are structured to ensure that that does make the graduates suitable for entry to professional practice. Next slide. So just to make the whole situation more complicated, because one thing engineers are very good at is we do build models of reality, and that is what we are doing here. So taking that last couple of slides and then putting that in the context of the accords and the agreements that are part of of which the Washington Accord is one. The accords cover that whole area around the university education, where there are specified learning outcomes, the engineering program itself, and then a set of graduate attributes that are used to ensure that the whole education program will set those graduates up for entry into the profession. We then have a set of agreements that deal with mutual recognition of our professional practice, our chartered status. But for the purposes of my presentation here, I'm concentrating on the quality assurance of the engineering education process, which is where the Accords sit. Next slide. So I just put this in again as a reminder of the difficulties that we can have in trying to think about how we look at the context in which we are operating and keep the innovation alive to ensure that we can keep moving forward, whatever situation we find ourselves in. Next slide. That constant tension between ensuring quality, which does always tend to drive us towards the known, wanting to know, as the nurses did, how many towels there were next to the bed, against the messiness of innovation that is so much more difficult to understand. And as an educator, as someone who is constantly thinking about how we are ensuring that quality assurance, we are always in the process of ensuring that that balance beam does have some balance within it, and that there is a level of rigor in ensuring that that balance is maintained. Next slide. So if that is the environment within which we are operating around engineering education processes, and there are engineering education processes in Peru, there are engineering education processes in Australia, in a number of the other countries around the world, and at the moment there are about 20 countries that, or about 23 actually, that have agreed that they will give mutual recognition of the substantial equivalence of their engineering programs. And they have done this because that assists with mobility of engineering and also facilitates quality assurance, creating networks, sharing ideas to the, for the outcome of assisting each other to build rigor, to build more quality assurance in all of our systems, and to feel that our graduates are as competent to work in one country as they are in another. Next slide. So this is the global engineering network of the Accords. The Engineering Washington Accord members are noted in red, and the provisional members in orange. We then have a number of members who are also part of the FIAT network, and also, and I believe you in Peru are also part of the NA network as well. So it is fairly well distributed and a growing opportunity for global mobility and global quality assurance development. Next slide. The way the Accords operate, we do have international alliance meetings every year. At those meetings, we agree provisional and full membership after a process of review by 3 other signatories of the members. We are in the process at the moment of reviewing exemplar standard graduate attributes, going back to the model that I went through earlier. And then the basis is always peer review by 3 signatory members to establish equivalence between us. Next slide. So taking on board that we are not all trying to be the same, but we are trying to leverage our differences and understand that we can learn from each other, and that maintaining that those differences, maintaining an engineering education ecosystem that has diversity adds value to all of us and also allows each of us to maintain the integrity of our cultural and socio-economic situations. We are structured as a living compact whereby each of us will approach our deliberations with confidence that we believe we can gain insight from our different cultural, socio-political and legal environments, rather than driving to some structural normality that makes privileges one over the other. That we can find common ground and build a strong network from our collective understanding, and that we can negotiate, learn and transform in good faith as we create the terms of our engagement. And the challenge of the Accords, going back to that whole issue of quality tending to drive towards sameness, is to constantly, consciously choose the power of mutual recognition and the embedded diversity in our organisational DNA, and to ensure that quality assurance tools are chosen carefully to enhance rather than undermine this DNA diversity. Next slide. At times, and I certainly know that all of us who go to the Accord meetings would understand that it is hard but very rewarding work. It does require constant maintenance and nurturing and close interaction, and at times that can be difficult. It is so very easy to slip into actions that derive from unintended subtle claims about our way superiority at times. Why aren't the rest of you doing it the same as me? Type conversations that we constantly need to avoid. And one of the big ones that certainly I find as one of those people who live in an island away from everyone else, which means that I have never had to learn another language. It is very easy, I understand then, to misunderstand across language nuances in our haste to make things happen. And that for me is a very big issue, particularly for engineers, because we do tend to like to get things done. And at times the frustration of having to listen and think about what we might each be saying as opposed to what we think each other are saying can cause us pause that we find difficult. And again, and I, as an engineer, love to deploy shortcut metrics, proformas, standards, and other tools that, of course, are very powerful to assist us with that process of quality assurance. But again, it is important to make sure that that does not drive us away from innovation and the energy, the continuous relationship building that we need to undertake. Next slide. So there are a number of reasons I particularly tend to push this idea, and perhaps COVID has made this more obvious, is that if you look at most of the scientific or much of the scientific analysis, there is a lot of evidence that diversity drives innovation and capacity to meet complexity, disruption, and change. So if we only have one model of doing things, then when it meets something that is very disruptive, at times what we have done in the past is not necessarily going to be what is possible in the future. And as we have seen with COVID, suddenly a lot of the issues that we had about doing everything long distance has had to be overcome. And if we had not had somewhere in the world that level of engagement, despite the fact that I know many academics felt, for example, that we could never move away from classroom activities, suddenly COVID has meant that all of those other possibilities that were living also in our ecosystem, like distance or project-based learning or distance education, are suddenly coming to the fore as methodologies or strategies that we can use to deal with the challenges we are facing at the moment. And we do normally find that whenever a system is captured by one culture, by one worldview, or by one intellectual tradition, that our capacity for intellectual flexibility and agility is significantly reduced. Next slide. So the challenges of our times are very much tied into the Sustainable Development Goals. They are quite a symbol of the challenges that we face at the moment: the poverty, inequality, climate, environmental degradation, prosperity, and peace and justice. My perspective is that engineering, of course, has a large role to play in this area. One of the roles that I have at the moment is I chair a collaborative research centre in Australia looking at how we can make concrete smart, how concrete, that ubiquitous material that we use everywhere, is reaching significant challenge. And it has been very much one of those materials that we have used in the past. We now need to understand that, again, the way we have done the things in the past that have got us to where we are with the global challenges that we face, we need to think differently about how we are going to move forward with those. And therefore, our curriculum, therefore our quality assurance of our engineering education is going to have to transform to meet all of these situations. So the education that I had as an engineer, where when I learned about concrete, all I did was learn about concrete and how to build things with it, I certainly was given no understanding of the need for there to be perhaps a circular economy, that we needed to be thinking about how we made sure that we tread far more lightly on the earth than we assumed we could do when I was learning engineering. So the way we as engineers are now having to create the curriculum, or as academics to create the curriculum for this future, is going to need that constant balance between innovation but maintaining quality, because in the end, the bridges must stand up. When we're moving through the city, we really don't want to see all of the traffic lights not operating appropriately. There are very good reasons why the rigour of engineering is an important part of how we develop that curriculum, at the same time as we are managing all of these scenarios that are created actually in part by the way we thought as engineers over the last 100 years. Next slide. So for a while now, we have been doing some collaboration with NA and with FIAP, the other major global engineering activities around accreditation. We did do a publication in 2015 on best practice in accreditation with NA, and we have been working with FIAP. A number of FIAP members are also members of the accords and the agreements, and we've developed an accreditation development pathway that will facilitate signatory status among FIAP members. We are also now working in collaboration with the World Federation of Engineering Organisations to establish projects to address the needs of the members in the developing world based on our standards, our International Engineering Alliance standards, the graduate standards and the competency standards. So this work is ongoing at the moment. Next slide. Because as with all things, we can't, in our accreditation process as part of the Accords, we can't remain static. We again have to have constant care to maintain the quality while ensuring that the benchmark standards are capable of meeting the present and future challenges, which is why the work that is going on with one of our working parties at the moment that is being run by Professor Bülent from Turkey, and with a number of members from other Washington Accord signatories and also members of WFIO, is to look at those standards that we do use, the graduate attributes and the competency standards, and see how are they covering emerging technologies and disciplines. How are they aligning with the UN Sustainable Development Goals and covering diversity and inclusion and ethics, to reflect a lot of the thinking and the emergent thinking that has had to emerge. For example, cyborgs or unmanned aircraft, or all sorts of things that are changing the way we live and the way we will be living in the future, and how we as engineering need to reflect that in the expectations we have of our graduates as they leave their education. How are they going to think about all of these things? Because we can't teach them everything. We can only teach them to be prepared for the changes that they will need to deal with, and to have the tools available for them to meet those challenges as they move forward. And there are so many expectations of young people today as they graduate regarding what intellectual agility, creativity, and innovation they are required to have. They're certainly not words that were ever used for my graduating class about those expectations of having a range of skills that perhaps weren't considered as necessary or as a requirement for the future as they are today. So this need to have professional judgment that will meet constantly evolving community needs is a challenge for new graduates, and our curriculum needs to have the structure and the content that will enable them to do that. Next slide. I've spoken a bit, I got ahead of myself, and I did talk about this work that is going on at the moment. So that is a very difficult slide to read, but it does show our, and I'm happy for these slides to be shared with everybody, but it does show our graduate attributes and professional competencies, and how we are working through, as I said earlier, the getting that intellectual agility, creativity, and innovation. Next slide. So the great disruptor, the reason that we are all here now, very good at Zoom, something that probably I certainly know I didn't use very much prior to 2020, but have now become quite, it's quite a big part of my life, and I'm sure it is with many of you. It has been something that has really made us have to think about what accreditation, what quality assurance in engineering education is going to look like when we can't actually visit each other in person. And if the Secretariat and the executive of the Accords have any time at all at the moment, it is spent trying to think about how we are going to continue those 3 reviewers process of reviewing each other, so that we can continue to establish that mutual recognition that has been such a fundamental part of how we do the quality assurance in engineering education. So if anyone has any ideas, I would welcome any input, because we have, and I'm sure human beings will always rely to some extent on that that face-to-face present that is so difficult for us to have at the moment. So how do we find other mechanisms to achieve the same thing is quite difficult. Next slide. And that, how do we deal with this disruptor, is happening for all of us. We have very strongly relied on the idea of the sage on the stage. That has been very much the bedrock of curriculum. And that has been overturned in a year. And the requirements then to go from chalk and talk to the very highly technical learning and teaching, and all of the enabling technologies that are required to make that happen. It's all very well to say, yes, let's do everything on the internet or by distance, but the physical and virtual environment in which is required for that to happen, the fact that you do need to have capacity for your computer to have regular or a strong signal, for example, is fundamental to the capacity of students to do things at a distance. So it's not just about thinking of what is happening in the curriculum itself, but also the whole change that we are having to make to the enabling technological artifacts that will support that curriculum becomes a very important issue for all of us in engineering, for education, for all of us who are thinking about how we will do that quality assurance in education without compromising access to education for those who are not in a position to have access to those enablers. And that makes it a very difficult problem for us to work through effectively. It will take a lot of thinking. It will take a lot of us working together to ensure that we manage to maintain both. The next slide. So the quality, the innovation, the constant balancing that we need to be doing in a time of COVID just makes our life that little bit more challenging than it was 12 months ago. But the accent will always have to be on how do we structure those methodologies and those processes and procedures within our accreditation process, both to some extent you can say the quality assurance that happens within the university, within then the professional organisations, and then at the accord level. And all three of those have to be synergistic in the way that they operate to ensure quality assurance without drowning the academic in the artifacts of having to prove that quality assurance constantly. It is something that we will spend a great deal of time over this next 12 months working through. Next slide. So the responses that we have started since the COVID commenced was really probably around March, April that we started this work. And I'd have to say that it has been fairly slow for the last couple of months, I think, because everybody does a lot of this work as a volunteer. And so trying to do it on top of paid work does become difficult at times. But we had set up an accreditation in a virtual world base camp that has a lot of information in it that we are now working through to see whether we can use that as the basis for setting up a virtual accreditation system that will continue with the quality assurance ideas. There was a workshop organised by the Institution of Engineers Singapore and the Pakistan Engineering Council in June, and there are forums such as this one. And the more we do these and the more we learn from each other and the more we share the experiences in these workshops, the more we will be able to work together to create a shared and better future, despite the fact that we are in a time of COVID. Next slide. So the International Engineering Alliance Accords, we have mutual recognition of engineering education equivalence because we are trying to establish a global engineering education standard that drives sustainability, that facilitates mobility, creating networks and sharing ideas, building engineering capacity for sustainable development, and ensuring that the quality of the work that we do will achieve all of those goals that we have, working together to create a shared and better future. And I think that's the last slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Taylor, for your presentation. Let me share with you some questions of our participants. The first question is by Luis Barrera. How does the Washington Accord support or will support the introduction of the UN 2030 agenda in higher education institutions?
Can you be a little more specific around that?
Could you tell us about the importance of implementing the Sustainable Development Goals in universities?
Well, the Accords and the International Engineering Alliance believe that it is very important for those Sustainable Development Goals to be part of the curriculum, and which is why we are doing a review of the graduate attributes, the one I mentioned under Professor Bulland, because we would like to ensure that the language of those graduate attributes, which then become the outcome standards that are the basis of how the curriculum needs to be designed to achieve those outcomes, and those outcomes will reflect the Sustainable Development Goals. So the wording that will be used for those graduate attributes will reflect the fact that the students or the new graduates will be expected to have thought about those UN Sustainable Development Goals, and that we will see evidence in the curriculum that they have been considered. Did that answer the question?
Yes, we have another one from Professor Juan Tiza. Do you think that the quality of education was affected by this change to non-presential education?
That's, well, I think it has. I think that what it means, though, is that we are all far more aware now of the curriculum as something that gets designed rather than just happens. So if I look at, for example, the education I had at the University of New South Wales, and it was very good education. It was very much about who happened to be the professors who had their own particular research expertise. And so we were given their expertise around those areas. But my understanding of systems engineering, which is something that's evolved since I was learning to be an engineer, means that tying all of that together so that, for example, understanding the relationship between all of those different areas of expert advice, and also thinking about what that might mean in practice has become far more sophisticated in the last 40 years. To give an example, we all learned how to design, but say a structure, but the process then of moving into a design office, and then how the design office might be structured to ensure that there was a process of review of the analysis that was going on from different perspectives to make sure that if someone made a mistake, it was captured, wasn't necessarily taught, because we relied very much on the fact that there were big engineering government departments where there would be almost an apprenticeship that would take that up. The world has changed significantly since then, and now we need to design curriculum where it isn't just the content being given by the lecturer, but also opportunities for the students to role play a number of those situations so that they are prepared for them when they go out into the workplace. And I'm saying this very carefully because it all only works if we are actively ensuring that we do all of these other curriculum strategies in a way that maintains their rigor. So I often hear people say, well, the trouble is when you do teamwork, then some of the people hide, and so it's not worth doing it because people will hide. The problem with approaching teamwork in that sense is, instead of seeing it as an opportunity for students to learn what works in teamwork and what doesn't, so the curriculum can actually be designed to be a metacognition activity. It's not just the process of being in the team, but they also have to examine how they were in the team and what worked in the team. And then there are strategies to tease out who is doing the work and who is not doing the work, and make sure that the ones who are not doing the work fail. So those other ways of doing things besides thinking that they're learning something if they're sitting in front of you can work if they are done very carefully, but it takes the expertise of the lecturer and the discipline to ensure that it is designed to mitigate any risks associated with it. So no, I don't see the quality has, I see it can, because it's something outside a comfort zone, but I see, if it's done properly, that it actually enhances quality.
Thank you for your answer. We have the next question from Alfredo Soeiro. Will we have an equivalence agreement between EURACE and IEA?
Do we have one? The difficulty with between EURACE and IEA is not that we don't have the same aspiration, but the structure of how we have set up engineering education is different. So the URACE model is based on the 3+2, where for someone to be a professional engineer, they need to have a 5-year master's. The Washington Accord is set up on the idea that a 4 years bachelor's degree is an appropriate level for entry into the profession. So the difficulty is to agree whether it is the 4-year or the 5-year quantum of education that is required. So to some extent, it's something that at some stage we'll all have to sit down and work through. But at the moment, I'd say that our different understanding of the world is perhaps a little bridge too far for us to all to walk over at this point, because we'd all like to see, of course, the more education, but 5 years for most of the world to have to pay for would then mean it was very difficult for much of the world to be able to pay for that extra year. And the evidence, and I'm speaking now as a very parochial Australian who did the 4-year degree, there hasn't been that much evidence that we have more failures than they have in Europe. So I've just shown where I sit on that at the moment, but that's the reason we can't have that mutual recognition, because they would expect the 5 years and we won't accept the 3-year. So it's, but for example, Turkey and Russia and a number of have both a 4-year and a 5-year, and they are members of both. So there are ways that jurisdictions are operating between the two.
Thank you for your answer. We have another one. Another question from Martin Inca. He asks, why don't we use ISO 21001:2018 as a model for international accreditation? And this model is based on managed risk. What are your thoughts?
Look, we may do that. Well, it is a tool. It's a tool for the risk management side of it. It's probably something that could assist. And the reason I'm hesitating is that the problem with some of the standards is they did tend to become artifacts that were developed and put on a shelf. And also, we're just trying to work out how we maintain the innovation in a situation where we're not all trying to be the same, but we are trying to maintain that openness for mutual recognition of substantial equivalence rather than agreement that we are all doing the same thing. So how we tease out and how we all find the time to do the intellectual work on how we would manage that within an ISO environment, there probably is value in doing that. It's just finding someone who would be happy to do the work for us. So if you're offering, I certainly would be happy to receive a paper on it.
Thank you very much. The next question, I think, is the last one. It's regarding the what recommendations would you give to professors and students of engineering programs to face effectively the online teaching learning process in this moment when the programs are changing the delivery modes to non-traditional ones?
I think the best advice I can give is that there is no one answer, of course, but the development of a peer group to share ideas is very valuable. I know when I was a young academic, it was just at the time when a group of people who were interested in exploring alternative models of curriculum in Australia set up a group called the Australasian Association of Engineering Education. And it was those academics then that used to meet and share ideas, talk among themselves. And now many of them are deans of engineering themselves. And many of the conversations that we had over that period were about risk management, about how we could drive some of the systems thinking, some of the idea that design principles have a value in curriculum design were discussed in those forums. So it is about doing what we do well in engineering, which is working together in a team to design what we're doing and learning from each other, and then harnessing the I'll half talk to all the deans here. The big thing about that group now is it is supported by the deans of engineering in Australia, who provide support for that group to build that expertise and that to build that expertise, and that expertise of itself does help the risk management, because the academics are learning the strategies to overcome or to manage the risks of distance education. For example, do you know if it's the student there who's actually at the other end of the line doing the exam? Now, there are many, many strategies that a number of academics are doing around the world. And how do the academics we're talking about here find out about them? It's by participating in those forums and hearing what works and what doesn't.
Thank you very much. Enrique Alvarez has a question always. Regarding risk management, what is your opinion with respect to distance education because of the pandemic?
Well, distance education means that you have a different sort of curriculum design to one that is a face-to-face curriculum. The big problem for engineering, of course, is that we do like or prefer, and it is part of developing the expertise of the students or the competencies of the students, that we do have workshops and manipulation of physical artifacts. So that is one of the areas of risk to the outcomes for engineering. But that maybe can be managed in other ways. And again, it is a matter of everybody sharing ideas on how they might do that. There are many academics around the world who have built virtual laboratories, for example, that you can do across the internet. So it might be that some of those activities are replaced by virtual or simulations or other methodologies that we haven't used in the past. But again, it will take us as academics a little time to learn how to manage that. But I have every confidence that it's just a matter of turning our brain to it and thinking through how to do that. And we should be able to come up with some responses. I'm partly hesitating here because I've been running distance education engineering programs for about 15 years in my career. When 2001, I had distance education and engineering up in Queensland, and there's a very interesting model of that happening that's fully distance, that's been going now for 5 years down in Charles Sturt University, that has been recognised by MIT as one of the models for the future. So those, and MIT did a whole, it went around the world and looked at a whole lot of emerging ideas. Now that was done 3 years ago. So there are a number of models out there of how to do distance education that it is worth looking at.
Thank you very much, Professor Taylor, for your valuable time and for kindly accept the ICACIT invitation to share with us in this Symposium 2020.
My pleasure, and I would like to congratulate you. You are a very valuable part of the Washington Accord, and we always appreciate the input and the professionalism that you share with us as part of your membership of the Washington Accord. Thank you.
Thank you. We all enjoyed your presentation, and we send you warm greetings from Peru. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bien, muchas gracias a los participantes que nos acompañaron en esta parte del programa. Les agradecemos también por sus preguntas y los invitamos a continuar con nosotros en la siguiente parte del programa, que implica que puedan conectarse al siguiente enlace que se les ha compartido. Muchas gracias a todos y continuamos en el simposio de ICACIT 2020. Buenos días.
Muchas gracias, muy buenos días con todos.
¿Seguimos en este panel o tenemos que volver a ingresar?